If political protest is putting you off holidaying in Egypt, spare a thought for the people running the country's biggest museum. On Fast Track this week, we're in Egypt to find out how the country's biggest and oldest museum is surviving in the middle of Cairo's Tahrir Square. We're in Wales to try a new experience sure to get the adrenaline pumping. Plus,
later, on the Fast Track Travel Clinic, you book a round-trip ticket but can only fly the first leg. How much of a refund can you expect? A clue, it's a round number.
Welcome to Fast Track. I'm Fiona Foster. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you'll stay with us for the next half hour because we've got some inspiration for your next vacation and hopefully some traveller's tips you'll find useful thrown in for good measure. But we'll start today's programme in Egypt and its extraordinary Museum of Antiquities, some of which date back to the times of the first pharaohs. Situated in Tahrir Square, the museum suffered looting and was at risk of further damage during the 18 days of the revolution back in 2011. Well, 2 years on, our reporter Shaima Khalil has been finding out how Egypt's oldest and biggest museum has been coping as the unrest there continues.
By the evening, Tahrir Square, the heart of official Cairo, was in the hands of the demonstrators.
In a corner of Tahrir Square today, we saw clashes with the police and injured protesters.
But now thousands of protesters are back in Tahrir Square.
This is where the Egyptian revolution was born. Tahrir Square is where millions of Egyptians took to the streets demanding change. 2 years on, violence and demonstrations are still ongoing. You can see the evidence of this in this burned out police vehicle. This square, however, also has a very famous neighbor.
With over 120,000 artifacts, the Egyptian Museum offers the biggest collection of antiquities from Egypt's pharaonic past. This glorious exhibition of culture has been suffering in the past 2 years. Like the rest of the country, the museum had to bear the brunt of the ongoing violence and political turmoil that have followed the uprising. Officials in the museum told us that in February 2010, a year before the revolution, the museum received more than 3.5 million tourists. The same month this year, the number went down to around 800,000. During the 2011 revolution, the museum was looted. It was reported that a group of thieves went through the skylights in the second floor of the museum. Lutfi Abdelhamid, head of one of the sections here in the museum, showed me where it happened.
They used something like a rope, big rope, to be down on some of the cabinets here, and they broken the cabinets here, and they stolen some artifacts in everywhere in the museum, about 65, but we found most of them.
After this incident, citizens formed a human chain to protect the museum's premises. But as the violence and chaos continue in Egypt, security remains a major concern here. When we visited the museum, it was almost empty, except for a group of Egyptian art students and a small group of tourists. But Dr. Abdelhamid says that despite the ongoing protests in Tahrir Square, the museum is safe to visit.
We have a very, very strict security in the museum because we have a special security of our Ministry of State of Antiquities, and also we have the police of tourism and antiquities as well.
Tell me about the security in the museum. What are you doing to keep it safe from all the violence that's happening outside?
We have a special security system in that day, especially on Fridays, because that days especially have all of the people come to the Tahrir Square to elaborate about their opinions about the revolution, about what happened in the country.
The museum also needs substantial funds for maintenance and the regular upkeep. But with Egypt's economy in dire straits, it's not likely that this will be high on the government's agenda.
This is the burned out building of the ruling party during the time of former President Hosni Mubarak. This happened in the early days of the revolution in 2011. Now, given the violence now is not as dramatic, but it's this kind of damage that people fear could spill over in the museum. Being surrounded by ongoing demonstrations, it's very hard to convince tourists to come and visit.
And of course, there are those whose daily living depends on the flow of tourists.
Before the revolution, I work here day by day, maybe 2 times, 3 times with the tourists in one day. This month, I lost my job completely. In 1 week, just I work 1 hour, just 1 hour with 2 persons. I spent 1 hour in 1 week. What about last month? I come here 15 days. From 15 days, just I work just 2 or 3 days. In every day, just 1 hour or 2 hours. That's all. So it means I lost my business completely as a tour guide. Egypt lost its income from the tourism.
But it's not just the museum that's suffering. The whole tourism sector in Egypt has been hit hard. The Luxor balloon tragedy, in which 19 tourists died, as well as major hotels in Cairo being ransacked during riots and kidnappings in Sinai, all have dealt further blows to an already struggling sector. All the government efforts to encourage tourists to visit the country fall short in the face of events like these, where the authorities don't seem to be much in control. For tourists to feel safe enough to come to Egypt, Egyptians themselves have to feel a sense of security. And until the government finds a way of bringing that back to the streets, Egypt's tourism sector will continue to struggle.
Shaima Khalil reporting on Egypt's plight and its deteriorating tourism industry. And we'd love to hear what you think on that. Are you planning a trip to Egypt? Have you been recently? Or perhaps you live there? Do send us your thoughts to the usual address, fasttrack@bbc.com. Now let's have a look at what else has been happening in the travel world this week. Here's Greg Mackenzie.
Spare a thought on your next flight across the North Atlantic, as journeys could get a lot bumpier in the future if the climate changes. Scientists in the UK predict the speed and instability of winds at high altitude will increase turbulence by between 10 and 40% by 2050. It could lead to more expensive journeys as pilots try to avoid the worst affected areas. If you're planning a trip to South Korea, you should check your country's latest travel advice, as Taiwan advises its citizens not to travel there after threats of a missile launch by the North. It sent nuclear tensions soaring around the world. A grey alert for South Korea has been issued, which is a popular tourist destination for Taiwanese, calling on travellers to delay sightseeing, business and study trips there. To Australia now, and a row has erupted in Sydney after the authorities tore up a road crossing that had been painted in rainbow stripes for the annual gay Mardi Gras. The crossing had become a tourist attraction, but the Conservative government in New South Wales said it was a safety hazard late at night and replaced the vibrant stripes with grey tarmac. One local councillor condemned the move as an aggressive act against Sydney's lesbian and gay community. Thousands of tourists were left disappointed this week in Paris after the Louvre Gallery closed for the day because of a protest by staff against pickpockets operating there. Employees walked out complaining that both they and visitors were being targeted by a growing number of aggressive thieves.
We are very disappointed because we have bought our tickets in England, and it looks as if there's no prospect until tomorrow morning of getting in, and we're due to leave tomorrow. So I'm very angry.
The children have been brought up in New Zealand and it's their first trip to Paris, and the one thing they wanted to do was to see the Mona Lisa. So we're disappointed.
The museum's now reopened and it's business as usual. Next time you're in London, you might want to head to the business district following the discovery of 10,000 Roman objects. The site, which is now being dubbed the Pompeii of the North, contains the largest collection of small finds ever recovered on a single site in London, covering a period from 40 AD to the early 5th century. And finally, tourists on a tour boat ride in the Florida Everglades had a front row seat as their tour guide jumped out of the boat and started wrestling a 10-foot python.
I didn't even realize it was 10 feet. I thought it was definitely over 6 feet, definitely bigger than me. Didn't realize it was 3 times the size of my own arm.
This amateur video shows the tour guide's face-to-face encounter with one of the world's most dangerous species. But for Tommy Owen, the catch of a lifetime was just an ordinary day.
They'll never get a show like that ever again. That was a highlight of their life, or of their vacation for sure.
And after sizing up the predator, Owen says he let his instincts take over and decided to hop in after it. As for the tourists, let's just say they got more than what they had bargained for.
Well, now you're up to date, we're going to take a short break. But do stay with us, because coming up, Simon Calder will be here with his regular travel clinic. And he has advice for you if you're planning a fly drive holiday to Florida. Plus, we're taking to the longest zip wire in the Northern Hemisphere.
I'm cold and scared, shaking with excitement.
So do hang on.